we've got to change the world. We can't just change ourselves and somehow cope with it all. And women who get that line are really being sold a, you know, a pile of crap.
I've been asked several times in the last few days, when they knew I was speaking on this question, is the women's movement dead? And one of the responses, of course, to that is to say, not while we're here. But you know, there's another layer to that whole question. The questions that are implied by it are, where is the women's movement? What's it doing? How is what we're doing now different from what we did 10 years ago? What have we achieved? What are our goals now? Women are struggling in three main areas: around their jobs, their work, their unions, around social services, and around control of our bodies and sexuality. We want also the right to sexual choice, the right to be heterosexual, bisexual, homosexual. We also want a safe and healthy environment. We want a non-nuclear future. And here we also want occupational safety, and we don't mean the banning of women or pregnant women or potentially pregnant women from unsafe work conditions. We mean the ending of unsafe work conditions for women and men alike. It's a huge task. It will require all the energy and all the solidarity we can muster. And it's a task that's more than achieving equality with men. We want to end the oppression of any human being by any other human being. No one will do it for us. No one ever has. But we can do it.
I'm delighted that I saw any results for what I did. I mean, I fight politically because I can't not fight, okay? I mean, I'd fight if we never won anything except to make it harder for the people on the other side. I guess I've always been turned on by ideas and debates and politics. I mean, by the time I was, about 10, I was involved in all of that sort of thing. My father was very political. And I guess their being immigrants had a big effect on my life in many ways. And they made me feel okay about being working class, too. I can remember my father telling me the people who do the dirtiest jobs get the lowest pay. And shouldn't they get the highest because the jobs are the dirtiest? And so, or I can remember my showing him a picture of Van Horn hammering the last spike in the CPR. And underneath it said, Van Horn who built the CPR, and my father said, like hell he did, Chinese laborers built the CPR. So I always had this really strong sense of where it was at and a good feeling about who I was and what I was going to do with my life in those contexts. And that was really a big thing to give me. I always knew, I suppose, that women should be equal. But I grew up, I was born in 1934. I went slightly through the Depression, the Second World War, and that whole post-war McCarthy period. And I grew up in an atmosphere where women were really second best. And even though I theoretically didn't agree with that, I wanted to be a man. That was the way out of it. The way out of it wasn't to become equal. That was clearly impossible. The way out of it was not to be who I really was. And I didn't have close relationships with women during those periods. My close relationships were always with men. All our relationships were. Why do you want to relate to somebody who's second best? No point to that. And I can remember in something like 72, after years of political activity, the first time I invited a woman over for an evening to talk politics, and realizing how significant that was. I got to Toronto after my husband died, and I joined a women's group called the Toronto Women's Caucus. And it was partly an action group, and it was partly a consciousness-raising group. And you found yourself with all these women talking about your common problems. And suddenly those meetings, and the way they operated, and the feelings you got, were so much more alive than any other political things I'd ever done. I'd always been politically active around other people's issues. In a way, I felt that way. And suddenly I was working in this group, and it was for me. And it was all the things I'd been angry about all my life and hadn't even known enough to be angry about. And it just was an incredibly different experience. And we just felt so sorry for each other. That was part of it. But you got so much support, and it was okay to talk about the things that bothered you. You didn't have to hide them anymore. And then you got some feeling you could fight it. It was really a funny experience. When I went on my first abortion demonstration, I felt really freaked by it. I mean, here we were saying this word out loud on the street. I mean, the stories. I remember one woman, I guess it was the worst one I ever heard. Diane got raped by a cab driver when she was about 18. And then wound up going to Ottawa for an abortion because she couldn't get one in Toronto. And the guy suggested to her, after he began the process, that having intercourse with him would speed it up. Okay? I mean, that's how impossible it got. You just... I mean, I don't know how that woman... Well, okay.
How was it for you in those early days, just after Peter died?
Oh. I spent a year grieving. I mean, just feeling enormously depressed and a little crazy, I think. People told me afterwards I was a little bonkers. And incredibly hassled. Or I can remember working overtime, and I'd leave work at 5 o'clock, pick her up at the center, take her home, run a babysitter in, and go back to work. And then work till midnight to make up for the fact that I'd taken a supper break when nobody else had. And then get up at 6 in the morning and start the drill again. There's just no relief from it at all. And no relief for the kid either, which is hard. She remembers some nice things about it, I think, but I remember it as a pretty disastrous period. And then I had my first bout with cancer when she was 3.5. So that really made things more difficult again.
Our next speaker this morning, our keynote speaker, is Pat Schulz. Pat is a daycare parent. She was one of the founding members of a daycare center in Toronto, the Duke of York Community Daycare. She was a member of the Daycare Reform Action Alliance, and she's now a member of the new group, Action Daycare.
The studies show that there's no appreciable difference in the attachment between parents and kids, whether their kids are in daycare or their kids stay at home with them. Then there's the argument that home care is best for child development, that kids learn and grow faster and so on. And the studies show the same thing. What they could do if they set out to prove that if you had superb care, what you could do with children, is I'm damn sure they could prove that daycare, superb daycare, is better than home care. And I'm not saying better than all home care, but better than average home care. Better than the untrained mother saying, I've got to do the laundry today, and taking the kid to the laundromat, and he scrambles around with his little truck in the middle of the laundromat, you know? Or goes through the supermarket with the mother saying, don't pick that up, we all know the kind of care children get at home. They get a lot of pretty routine care because the mother is not solely engaged in looking after a child. She's engaged in doing a whole series of other tasks. And that doesn't make for the best of care, okay? Would you prefer to have women on welfare when they want to move back into the workforce? Welfare costs more than daycare does, even in dollars and cents, apart from all the other repercussions. Would you prefer to have neglected children? Because you're going to pay for them eventually, you know. You're going to wind up paying for them in mental institutions. You're going to wind up paying for them in penal institutions, in psychiatric services, in poor health care, in medical costs. We're all used to thinking of daycare as costing nothing. You think, what did it cost to raise you? Nothing. Your mother did it for nothing. And so people look at $200 to $400 a month and say, why? Why does it cost that much? You know why? Because it's worth it. Because if you give good quality care to kids, that's what it costs to do it, and it's worth every penny you pay for it. And there isn't something wrong that it costs a lot now. What was wrong was that we all did it for nothing before. That was what was wrong with it.
But you gotta bang the table like that. I really like that. Hang on to your
Candy says to me when I go out to give the speech, Mom, thump and yell. They really go for that. I was saying when the women's movement first started, and I was around Toronto Women's Caucus, and just beginning to really turn on to how we were getting screwed. And I worked at Royal Trust in an office. And, you know, it was a typical situation, you know, women training men to do jobs they got paid twice as much for, to be their supervisors, the whole pile of crap. And I got so angry, and I decided to desensitize. I'm not going to be aware of how much I'm being screwed, because I'll go crazy if I do.
It's true that in the 50s that women were crazy, and in the 60s they were angry. And I think the reason why they got angry in the 60s is because all the mothers were crazy and kept on saying to you, I hate this. I really hate this. My mother used to say to me, I hate housework. Don't end up doing this. Like, there was, I don't know about in your place, but in my place there were gigantic piles of an ironing basket. Just huge, huge piles. My mother hated ironing. And she was saying that she had this terrible feeling that one day she was going to go down in the basement and hang herself. And basically her feeling was that she had lived her life for nothing. Like she said,
it was over.
It doesn't make any difference whether I have lived or died, because who cares? Who cares? And I said, well, you raised 5 kids, that's something. You know, and she says, she said, are you going to raise 5 kids? And I said, well, no. And she says, right, you know,
What you're saying when you say no is that it was a waste of time in some ways.
Yes.
Yeah. It's those women who've raised families that are feeling crazy and abandoned and lost.
It took a great deal of courage in 1940, the late 40s and the early 50s, to decide that you were not going to stay home. Everyone said, don't go to work, stay home with your children. This is what's proper, this is what's right. And I went slowly mad. And one day I got up and said, no, it will not happen to me. I'm going to have to take a chance that if I am who I need to be a human being, then surely somewhere along the line, this will be the most important thing I ever give to my children.
It's been difficult for me to pull the two together to do the things I wanted to do, but provide her with what she needed. And I think she's gotten shortchanged at times. And I felt badly about that and tried to change it and make up for it. And it hasn't been very easy.
I look at some of the kids in some kids I know, and I think I wouldn't want to grow up like them. You know, they're pretty naive, and they just think that the best thing you can get in life is a husband and a happy family, you know, and a good home and a car, and that's it, you know, and that's the best thing you can get. When you do stuff like women's marches, it's nice because you know you're going to probably, you know, at least you're doing something to help and you're expressing your views. So, you know, I figure we win a lot of the things that we wouldn't have won without marches and stuff like that.
Are you still going to be fighting those fights when you're 30?
Yeah, I'll be marching till I can't march anymore. I'll march till I'm 52, 55, whatever. I'll march in a wheelchair. I don't care. I'll keep marching.
Do you feel proud of your mum?
I like the way she fights back. I wouldn't. You can respect a person who fights back, whereas if the person sort of just took anything, I don't think I would like them as much. And she gives good speeches, definitely. And she just, you know, she just shares my views, a lot of my views, so that helps. and she's just totally a good person. You know, but mainly we're just like, we're friends. We're not just mother and daughter. Best friend.
She's a child who's grown up thinking that friendships are enormously important and that relationships with people are crucial, because that's how I survive. I think she's a kid who's very compassionate, has a very strong sense of people who have less than she has, and gets very upset about that. And I'm very glad about that.
And I guess I envy younger women because they're able to take the whole feminist thing farther than I've ever been able to take it. And I wish it had happened for me when I was 20 instead of when I was 35.
Now I know I'm not going to be around to see a hell of a lot more of it. I've had cancer for the last 8 years, and it's a progressive disease. And but the other thing, I guess, in a way that the feminist movement has enabled me to do is to deal with that differently than I would have dealt with it otherwise, too. Because it seemed to me the big thing you had to deal with in that, as you deal with anything else in your life, is you stay in control of the situation. It's pretty grim when a doctor tells you there's only one treatment for cancer, and that's for breast cancer, and that's a modified radical mastectomy. And 3 weeks later, you read in the paper that there's another treatment called lumpectomy, and he didn't ever tell you about it. And when you confront him with it, when you go to him and say, look, I think you're a competent surgeon, but why did you not tell me there were alternatives? And he says, well, I'm not really satisfied with the research that's been done on it, and into the bargain, I really don't trust my patients to make the correct choice between mortality and cosmetics. And you look at the guy and think, look, it's my mortality and my cosmetics. And my intelligence and my values. And I think I've got enough on the ball that I'll make those decisions myself.
Well, that's one thing that's always hit me by when people say that I'm too aggressive, I'm too, really, I would be much a happier person if I would just be sort of more domestic and allow myself to be taken care of, People say, well, who offered? Who offered, right?
There is no
give me a
Line up
job.
is forming to the left.
Yes, right.
I don't know, I had an experience a couple of weeks ago going through just really typical difficult times with the man I love, whom I really love a lot. But we were having a difficult time, and I thought about people in my life like Pat, and I thought, why can't I find in my relationship with the man I love the same compassion and camaraderie and friendship that I find with my women friends? And the battle I have in front of me is to make those relationships with men as wonderful and fulfilling as the relationships I have with women. And to me it seems so simple, and yet it's so hard with men. And I want to bridge the gap.
One of my senses has always been that I got an enormous amount out of the women's movement. But I missed some things. Some of you younger ones, like you, Kathy, pushed it so much farther than I could ever push it. You had so much more sexual freedom than I ever had, okay? And I've looked at you and I've envied you. One of the areas I've envied enormously is the whole question of women loving women sexually. Look at that whole thing. I could never move in that direction. I come from a very traditional background. But I've looked at women who've been able to take it that far, who've been able to move into those areas, and I've said, God, it makes so much sense. And I envy them. I wish I were 10 years younger and I could have done that as well. And I think we have to talk about that. It's the ultimate threat in this sense.
Yes, it is.
That's the thing we were always accused of. You women's liberationists, you're all a bunch of lesbians. And for a long time, we got scared by that. And I don't think we're so scared anymore about it, okay?
I know it's the ultimate threat. In a way, we run lives where men are not the crucial things in our lives anymore, where women are more important, where our careers we run on our own, our kids we raise on our own, our homes we run on our own. And the thing that ties us to men sometimes is sexuality. And to give that up, in some cases, is the ultimate cutoff. And I can see why that really disturbs people. But I think we have to talk about bisexuality and lesbianism. I don't think we can dodge it.
As we've been talking about here, the need for straight women to embrace lesbianism as a possibility, and until all straight women are able to do that, none of us are free, in a sense. I think the same thing applies in reverse for us, you know, that until all women have control over their bodies, and ultimately lesbians, you know, take that the farthest in some ways, that none of us have control.
It is really saying no to the hold that all men have on all women. It is a truly, ultimately, it isn't a protection from the impositions, from the violence, from anything, but it is a statement of saying no. And certainly if kids grow up in contact with lesbians and gay people, they might clue into, yes, this is, you know, there is a permission here, a tacit permission that is being communicated by virtue of being out, by virtue of lesbians being out.
I mean, it astounds me that you're getting into schools, and I really think those kinds of lectures are going to make differences to kids. And kids are really going to say, yeah, it's okay, they aren't going to have the hang-ups we had. And I think that's such a step forward. I mean, it's loosened up that whole picture, and it becomes acceptable now not to be tightly involved with a guy all of the time. It's made it possible...
For straight women.
For straight women, even. It's loosened the whole heterosexual hold that society had on us and that held us.
That becomes the great contribution in some ways that the lesbians in the women's movement have made, is to see heterosexuality as an institution that oppresses all women, not only lesbian women, but straight women as well.
The question of power is always hurled at us, that if you want to change the role of women, what you're trying to do is grab power for yourselves. You've heard that.
Yeah, I think that's fine. I don't, you know, who would advocate a role of being powerless? Unless, you know, you're into Christianity at a fundamentalist level and you believe the meek shall inherit the earth. I don't happen to believe that. I believe the strong inherit the earth, and I'm in favor of going out after it. And, you know, and I don't think... I'm not going out after it just for myself. I'm going out after it for other people who are powerless as well. And I hope, because that's the only way we can achieve it, that they're going to join us and that we're going to take over.
Don't you think that women would treat power in different ways than the way men treat power? The way we know power?
See, I think there's a difference between women as individuals and the women's movement. I mean, I've met, and we've all met, women who make it in this society and who are just as rotten as men who've made it in this society. You know, I mean, we carried a whole daycare fight against a minister of community and social services when she was a woman, and she was just absolutely awful. So I don't think that women per se make a difference. Geez, it's cold. But I think women as... I think the process of the women's movement taking over society or achieving equality in society would automatically have to change the institutions. But if you simply had equality for women like men under this system the way it is now, I guess it wouldn't be very different in some ways. I mean, I don't want to be equal to men the way they are now. You know, I mean, I think that kind of equality, who needs it? I can only see feminism in the framework of a human society, and we haven't got one, and men haven't got one either. It's a lousy world for them, too. I mean, I think our position's much worse, but that's not good enough. I think we should call this quits, Kathy. It's starting to rain, for God's sake. Let's go inside.
But once a year for about 7 years we've been coming up here at this time of the year.
Sure.
And now your illness, and I guess when I come here now, the cottage is very strange because I'm afraid we don't have it next year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think people who live their lives merely to live them as pleasantly as possible and to have kids who will live them as pleasantly as possible, that seems to me inadequate as a life purpose. And I think you have a responsibility. And the trouble is that often you've got certain skills and you can't find a way to use them. You're in a society where there's no place for you to use the things you've got in some way that makes any sense to you. And what the women's movement did for me was say, hey, you're useful. You know, life without that would have been really sterile. I've always thought ideas were enormously important. And I've always hated the society I lived in and wanted to change it. And the vehicle for changing that is putting forward ideas to people and convincing them that it doesn't have to be this way. And there's a marvelous Bertolt Brecht poem where he says, maybe all of those things we did meant nothing except the rulers slept less comfortably in their beds at night. And if that's all I've done, it's been worth every minute of it.